My rich family abandoned me for marrying a poor man, but now they're begging because my perfect sister is destroying them, and my answer left them broken. I'm 32 years old. I work in digital marketing, and like a week ago, I got a call I never thought I'd get. My mom, Nancy, who basically erased me from her life 5 years ago because I married the wrong guy, according to her, was calling me asking for help. The irony is so huge that I still laugh when I think about it, but it also hurts, because at the end of the day, it's my family, and there's a part of me that will always wish things had been different. I guess I should start from the beginning, so this makes sense. I grew up in a family with money, quite a bit of money actually. My dad, Martin, has an import business that does really well, and my mom never had to work a day in her life. We lived in one of those big houses in a neighborhood where all the lawns look like they came out of a magazine and the cars in the driveways cost more than what most people make in 2 years. But here's the thing. I was never like the rest of my family. My younger sister, Gabriella, who's 4 years younger than me, basically absorbed all my parents' values about money and status and all those things that supposedly matter. I don't know why I turned out different, honestly. Maybe because when I was a kid, I had a teacher at school who taught me that what matters is how you treat people, not how much money you have. Or maybe I was just born this way. The point is, I always felt like the black sheep of the family, even though technically I had everything a girl could want materially speaking. My mom, Nancy, has this story she always told about how she grew up poor and how she promised herself that her children would never go through what she went through. And look, I get it. I mean, nobody wants their kids to suffer. But she took that to a completely extreme level, where basically money became the only thing that mattered. I remember when I was like 15, I brought a friend from school home, a super sweet and funny girl who came from a normal middle-class family, and my mom, afterwards told me not to invite her over anymore because our houses were on different social levels. Those were her exact words. Different social levels. I was like, seriously? Are we in the 18th century or what? But that's how she was, and that's how she still is. Gabriella was the perfect daughter for my parents. She loved going shopping, only wanted to hang out with boys from rich families, and basically her goal in life since she was like 16 was to marry someone millionaire. My parents adored her, spoiled her in everything, and she never had to work for anything. When she turned 18, my dad bought her a new BMW. And when she graduated from college, where she basically just went to parties and to get her Mrs. degree, they bought her an apartment. I, on the other hand, although I also had my privileges, was always more independent. I worked since I got out of college, paid for my own things when I could, and honestly wasn't very interested in the lifestyle they wanted for me. And then, I met Brandon. It was like 8 years ago, at a networking event for my job. He sold software for businesses. Nothing glamorous, but he was good at what he did. The first thing I noticed about him was that when he talked to me, he asked me about my work, about what I liked to do, about my opinions on random things. He didn't ask me where I lived, what car I drove, or any of those questions that basically the guys my mom wanted me to meet always asked me to see if it was worth investing time in me. Brandon was, I don't know, genuine. And he was funny, and he had this way of making me feel like what I thought really mattered. He came from a humble family, his parents were teachers, and he had worked since he was 16 to pay for college. For me, that was incredibly attractive, the fact that he had built his life with his own hands. We started dating, and I was like, wow, this is what it feels like to be with someone who loves you for who you are, not for your last name or your bank account. We spent time together doing normal things, like going to the movies or cooking at his apartment or just walking and talking. We didn't need to go to expensive restaurants or exclusive events to have a good time. And that for me was refreshing, because all my life I had been surrounded by people who measured everything in terms of how much it cost. Of course, when I told my parents about Brandon after like 6 months of dating, it was a disaster. My mom immediately asked what he did, and when I told her he was a salesman, I literally saw how her face transformed. She asked me what family he was from, where he had studied, where his parents lived, basically a complete interrogation. And when she found out he came from a middle-class family and that he didn't have important connections or money, she basically decided he wasn't enough for me. My dad was a bit more subtle at first, but he also made it clear that he expected me to be with someone from our economic level. Gabriella, of course, was horrible. She told me I was wasting my life with someone who would never be able to give me the lifestyle I was accustomed to. I told her I could give myself that lifestyle alone if I wanted to, that I didn't need a man for that, but she didn't understand the concept. During the next 2.5 years that Brandon and I kept dating, my parents did everything possible to sabotage the relationship. My mom constantly tried to set me up with sons of her rich friends, guys who drove Porsches and talked about their trust funds on the first date. I went to those setups forced because my mom basically emotionally manipulated me until I agreed, but I always made it clear I had a boyfriend and wasn't interested. My dad, for his part, tried to convince me that Brandon was only with me for the money, which was ridiculous because Brandon never asked me for anything, always insisted on paying his share, and in fact, at the beginning, didn't even know exactly how much money my family had until we'd been dating for a year. But Brandon and I loved each other. Really. He treated me like a queen. Not because I had money, but because he genuinely cared about my happiness. He listened to me when I had a bad day, supported me in my work projects, and made me laugh even when I was in a bad mood. And I loved him for his integrity, his work ethic, his kindness to everyone no matter who they were. We had talked about getting married since the second year of our relationship, and we both knew it was what we wanted. So after 3 years of being together, Brandon proposed. It was super simple and perfect. In the park where we'd had our first date, nothing ostentatious, just him and me, and this beautiful moment where he asked me if I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. Of course, I said yes. I was floating with happiness. When I told my parents that night at dinner, the silence was so awkward, I wanted to disappear. My mom finally said, "Well, obviously, I'm going to do a prenup, right?" And I was like, "What?" She explained that they weren't going to allow me to get married without a prenuptial agreement that protected my inheritance and any money they had given me or were going to give me. I told her Brandon wasn't interested in my money, that he had his own job and his own income. She practically laughed and said that all men say that until they have access to the bank account. Things escalated quickly. My dad told me that if Brandon really loved me, he wouldn't have a problem signing a prenup. Gabriella added that any decent man would understand that it's normal in families like ours. I tried to explain that asking Brandon to sign a prenup was basically telling him I didn't trust him, that I assumed his intentions were bad. But they wouldn't listen. My mom finally gave me an ultimatum. Either Brandon signs the prenup or they're not coming to the wedding. They weren't even going to pay for it or anything. They were literally just threatening not to attend. I asked my dad if he really agreed with this, and he, after a long pause, said yes, that I had to think about my future and protect what they had built for me. That night I cried, like I hadn't cried in years. Not because I cared about the money. Honestly, at that point I already had my own job and was earning well, but because I couldn't believe my own parents were putting me in that position. I told Brandon everything, and he, being the incredible man he is, told me that if signing that paper made my family feel at ease, he would do it. But I knew it wasn't fair to him. I knew my parents would always see him as someone inferior, as someone who had to sign papers to prove he wasn't a gold digger. And I realized that if I started my marriage giving in to their ridiculous demands, it was never going to stop. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I called them and told them that Brandon wasn't going to sign any prenup because we didn't need it and because I trusted him completely. And I told them that if they couldn't respect my decision and my future husband, then I didn't want them at our wedding. My mom screamed, literally screamed over the phone, that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. My dad told me I was being immature and that I was going to regret it. Gabriella sent me 20 messages telling me I was an idiot and that I was destroying the family. But I had already made the decision. I uninvited them from the wedding. Well, technically they had already said they weren't going to come, but I made it official that they weren't welcome. We got married 6 months later in a small and beautiful ceremony with our close friends and Brandon's family, who welcomed me with open arms from day one. Brandon's parents, who live on their teacher pensions and who probably have never had much money, treated me with more love and respect in one day than my own parents had in years. It was bittersweet, obviously. Part of me wanted my parents to be there. I wanted my mom to help me get ready. I wanted my dad to walk me down the aisle. But another part of me was at peace with my decision because I knew I was doing the right thing. After the wedding, I didn't hear anything from my family for 5 years. 5 complete years of silence. My mom blocked me from all social media. My dad didn't answer my calls the few times I tried to contact him in the first months. And Gabriella basically acted like I had died. It was painful. I'm not going to lie. I missed having a family. I missed the Christmas parties, birthdays, all those things. But Brandon and I built our own life, and it was a good life. He moved up at his job, and now he's a regional manager. I've also advanced in my career and earned pretty well, and we bought our own house 2 years ago. It's not a mansion like my parents', but it's ours and we love it. We travel, we have good friends, and honestly, we're happy. Sometimes I wondered how my parents were doing, how Gabriella was doing, but I learned to move on. And then came that call a week ago. I saw my mom's name on the screen and I froze. I hadn't talked to her in 5 years and suddenly she was calling me. I hesitated whether to answer, but curiosity won. I answered and her voice sounded weird, like tense and desperate. She said, "Hi, Allison. It's your mom," as if I didn't know who it was. There was an awkward silence, and then she went straight to the point. She told me she needed my help, that Gabriella was in a really bad situation, and that I was the only one who could do something about it. She told me that Gabriella, who's now 28, had been dating for the last year a guy named Garrett. Apparently, Garrett came from a super rich family, like richer than ours, and my parents at first were delighted. Finally, Gabriella had found someone on her level, someone appropriate, all those things my mom always said mattered. But it turns out Garrett has serious gambling and alcoholism problems. He's been losing huge amounts of money in casinos and online betting, and now he owes money to dangerous people. And my dad, trying to protect Gabriella and keep up appearances, has been paying Garrett's debts. He's already spent like $200,000 and the debts keep growing. And my mom was telling me all this and I literally couldn't believe what I was hearing. She told me that Gabriella doesn't want to leave him because she's in love and because she thinks she can change him. I said okay, and what exactly do you want me to do? She told me that maybe I could talk to Gabriella, that I was always the sensible sister, and convince her to break up with Garrett. I stayed silent for a moment, processing the audacity of what she was asking me. This woman, who hadn't talked to me in 5 years, who told me I was dead to her when I married Brandon, was now asking me to fix the mess her favorite daughter had created. I asked her, "Seriously, Nancy? Are you really calling me after 5 years to ask? Me to help you with Gabriella?" She stayed quiet, and I continued. I reminded her how she and Dad treated me like trash when I decided to marry the man I loved. A man who, by the way, is 1,000 times better person than this Garrett that Gabriella is with. I reminded her how they told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, how they cut me completely out of their lives. I told her, "You know what, Nancy? Gabriella is an adult. If she wants to be with a loser who's taking her down to ruin along with you guys, that's her problem. It's not my responsibility to fix her bad decisions." My mom started crying, which honestly was weird because she was never one to cry. She told me, please, that she was my sister, that family is important. And I literally laughed. I couldn't help it. I told her, "Now family is important? Because 5 years ago, when I needed my family to support me and accept me, family wasn't so important." She hung up on me after that. I thought that was it. But 2 days later, my dad called me. He sounded calmer but also desperate. He explained that the situation was worse than what my mom had told me. Garrett not only has gambling debts, he's also been borrowing money from his parents' business without permission and has lost it all. Garrett's family is threatening legal action against anyone associated with him, including Gabriella, and my dad has been trying to protect her by paying everything, but he can't anymore. He's had to take money out of his retirement savings, he's had to sell properties, and he's on the verge of losing part of his business. I asked him, "And what do you expect me to do, Martin?" He told me he just wanted me to know the situation, that maybe I could talk to Gabriella. I told him something that probably sounds cruel, but that I felt needed to be said. I told him, "You know what, Dad? When I chose to marry Brandon, you guys told me I had to face the consequences of my decisions. You cut me out of your lives without thinking twice. Now Gabriella has made her own decisions, bad decisions, and maybe it's time for you guys to let her face the consequences too. Maybe if you cut her off like you cut me off, she'll learn to fend for herself." My dad stayed silent for a good while and then said he would think about it. We hung up and I felt weird. On one hand, I felt a kind of satisfaction, like a vindication after years of being treated as if I had been the one who was wrong. But on the other hand, I felt bad because at the end of the day, they're my family, and the idea that they're going through this doesn't make me happy, even though they caused it with their obsession with status and money. Last night my mom called me again, but this time she was furious. She yelled, "How dare I suggest to my dad that he cut off Gabriella? What kind of sister would do that?" I told her I learned from the best, that they had taught me that when someone doesn't meet your expectations, you just erase them from your life. She told me I was resentful and that she should never have called me. I told her she was right, that she shouldn't have called me, and not to do it again. I blocked her after that, and I also blocked my dad. Brandon was with me during all these conversations. He never said "I told you so" or anything like that, even though he would have had every right to. He just hugged me and told me to do what felt right for me. And what's right for me is to move on with my life, with my husband who loves me unconditionally, and let my family face the consequences of their own distorted values. The truth is, it hurts. It hurts because I'll always want to have a normal family, a mom who supports me, a dad who's proud of me for who I am and not for who I marry. But I also feel liberated in a certain way. For years, there was a part of me that wondered if maybe my parents were right, if I had made a mistake marrying Brandon. But now, seeing how their own values have led them to this situation, where their favorite daughter is taking them to financial and emotional ruin, I know I made the right decision. I chose real love over money, I chose integrity over status, and I chose my own happiness over the approval of people who clearly don't know what really matters in life. I don't know what's going to happen with Gabriella or with my parents. Part of me hopes that eventually Gabriella will open her eyes and realize that Garrett is destroying her. Part of me hopes my parents will learn that money and status don't guarantee happiness or healthy relationships. But honestly, it's not my problem anymore. I took my path 5 years ago, and it's been the right path. I have a wonderful husband, a life we've built together with effort and love, and I don't need validation from people who only value people for their bank account. Yesterday, Brandon and I were cooking together, something we do almost every day, and he asked me how I felt about everything. I told him the truth, that I feel sad, but also at peace. He kissed me on the forehead and told me he's never going to leave me, that we're always going to be together no matter what happens, and that security and that unconditional love is worth more than all the money in the world. It's funny how my parents never understood that, and probably never will.